The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
Once more, we play our dangerous game. A game of chess against our old adversary, inefficient computing.
A very important note before our Hippie hard drive experiment continues. I may use terms like tree hugger or hippie or something like that, but I have nothing against power conservation. I have nothing against green science, and I have nothing against green technology. Green science is still science. Green technology is still technology. And those folks out in California who cooked an entire Thanksgiving dinner on solar cookers that one year, that was cool. Science and technology at their core are about taking what you have and finding better ways to use what's there. And green science and green technology is no exception. With that in mind, we continue with today's experiment from this week's New Egg shipment, and basically the end of this experiment right here, because between all these 2.5 drives, we'll have a new array and we'll have a new Steam drive by the time we're done fiddling around with this stuff. Our last two contenders here are basically the top drives in the entry-level bracket that I can find that are still completely mechanical, but 2.5 inch. They represent maybe a change in philosophy and whatnot with what's being made these days. We have the Hitachi Global Storage 7200 RPM 1TB drive, and then there's a 5400 RPM 1TB Seagate, which is part of the Barracuda redesign from last year. Here's the interesting part though. 7200 RPMs, 5400 RPMs, roughly the same price point. This one has a ton of cache compared to, well, the hard drive that I got last go around, which was this one's desktop counterpart, had 64 megs of cache. This thing has 128. I don't know if that's to make up for the slower spin speed. Then this one only has 32, but this one is markedly heavier. The difference between this one and the Hitachi that we worked with last time, of course, is 7200 RPMs. But here's the interesting part. 7200 RPM, and yet look at that electrical specification. 800 milliamps on the 5-volt rail versus an entire amp on the 5-volt rail. So, the drive with the faster RPMs is more power efficient. Go figure, right? Regardless, between these two and the Hitachi that I pulled out of the Steam drive over there to run the extras drive, the way it's going to work is, highest with the same data, highest performance is the new data drive, most efficiency is the new extra drive, and then the third one will be the new Steam drive, and then Monolith will have 2.5 drives for everything except the games drive, which should be the fastest anyways. So here's the plan. We're going to give up the optical drive in this thing for a couple hours. Ooh, optical drive, no big loss. We're also going to unplug the games drive to plug these two in and have the 2.5 from last time, the original data drive, and then these two as the drives in the system. We're going to put all the same data on all three 2.5 drives, defrag them, and then see what they get for throughput to determine which one's going to be the data drive. And then of course the most efficient electrically becomes the new other drive, and then the remaining one becomes the new Steam drive. Game over, put it all back together, hook it up to the kilowatt, see how well we did. Just for reference, our starting point before I did any drive swapping, I measured it with the kilowatt. This thing got down to about 50 watts. When it wasn't doing anything exciting. I want to see how much lower it goes now that we're getting rid of some of these 3.5 drives and putting in 2.5s instead for stuff that's not too strenuous. And darn it, it's only been a week since I sent the vacuum robot over the rug. I don't know how I track in this much sand in a week with a sand trap over by the door, or sand trapper by the door, but I should just sweep the place instead and skip the carpets. There, we used some old packing plastic to insulate them from the metal things until I can come up with a more permanent solution for those drive sliders. I don't know if it's exposed metal on the circuit bottom of these drives, but they are made for laptops and stuff, so they're probably made with the intention of touching plastic rather than metal. Regardless, we can't ever be too cautious with this stuff, I don't think. Alright, let's see what we have for benchmarks. New drives are in. Yes, I went with S for Seagate and Z for Hitachi. That makes no sense whatsoever, but, you know, H was already taken, so... Alright, with nothing on them, what do we have for performance? Remember, the Seagate has higher cache but lower RPM. The Hitachi has higher RPM but lower cache. So, which drive design wins these days? At least when there's nothing on the drive. Seagate, 5400 RPM, tons of cache, it capped in the 120s. Hitachi, 7200 RPM, not so much cache, made it up to the 140s, almost to 150. So interesting, the more power efficient Hitachi actually has the better sequential throughput when there's nothing on it. Now the long part, where we have to copy over everything on the data drive to these two, and then do a three-way showdown between them, although I think it's gonna be Hitachi in terms of efficiency at this point. This may take a while. Once again, you folks watching this have it made. It is now hours later, as predicted, and here's our results. The original data drive 3.5 caps out in the 130s, the super efficient 5400 RPM caps out in the 60s, and based on the milliamp draw, that's the most efficient, so it's going to stay in the extra drive's position. Now let's take a look at the new drives. 70-something when slogged down with data for the new Seagate at 5400 RPMs, so all that cache didn't help it very much, now did it? And then there's the Hitachi in the 90s, tops, with basically 7200 RPMs and about half the cache of the desktop counterparts. So, here's the plan. Assuming that it doesn't stutter all over the place, or lag, or be too slow, or whatever, I'm going to try Hitachi for the array, 2.5, 2.5, and have one super fast drive for games, and that's it. If it gets too sluggish, we'll go back to this one. But for now, I just want to see how the whole Hippie hard drive setup works. And just like that, everything is back in the system, except for, yeah, My rationale is I don't expect to slam that data drive like I used to because there's more space for games on the games drive, which actually has the performance, assuming games don't go on the SSD to begin with. There is but one thing left to do. Let's hook up the kilowatt, and let's see what kind of idle wattage we get once everything stops running. This system used to bottom out around 50 watts when nothing exciting was going on in balanced mode. It now bottoms out around 40 watts. Power save mode will drop it into the 30s, and this can go even lower if we get rid of the moving part drives entirely and go all SSDs, but that would be super expensive at this point. But it gives me something to look forward to. Monolith is becoming even more the system that I wanted it to be when I put this thing together last summer. Man, it's dark in here. Lights have been dropped to movie mode. Let's see some Darth Vader style lights. Oh yeah, that's what we're talking about. Power on the beast! With a little bit more light this time, let's get the Dell-asaurus in on the fun. Interesting.
Epic fail.
Never understood why these things do that. I've seen these do this around the office, too. I also don't know why the CD drive sounds like a floppy drive sometimes. And just like that, it's Sunday. I'll tell you, these weekend projects can really... Well, no, I've just been playing too much Final Fantasy. I fixed the on-off-on problem on this thing. Turns out it's a feature on the board that's not going to work properly anymore. It's in the BIOS under Deep Sleep Control. Supposed to cut down on power consumption when the device is in standby mode. By how much, I wonder? But anyways, when I originally got the computer, it was set to disabled. So I turned it on because I'm like, yay, power saving! And then that's when all that started. It doesn't matter if it's an S5 or S4 in S5. If you turn that on, this thing will go on, off, on when you switch it on like that. And I'm really concerned about it being the computer equivalent of poking the thing on and off, especially with an SSD in it. So I'm going to set this to disabled and get out of the BIOS. And it shuts off, but it's going to click back on because I made the change. But it's not going to do that when I go to turn it on again. So let's wait for it to start back up, turn it off again, and demonstrate. One more time, 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 go! The Dell-asaurus now boots up like a regular computer again. Ain't that something? That was a very, very old inside joke, by the way. People who have been around on YouTube for an extremely long time will get it, but not too many others. But yay, Dell-asaurus works again. So I suppose the last thing we should do is I put the 3.5 that was originally in Monolith in here to replace that old, loud, clanky one that was there. Really slow, really clanky, really old too. So I want to see with the new 3.5 drive, what's the power efficiency on this system when it's not doing anything too exciting. Okay, one last round with a kilowatt. Let's see what it does. Turns on correctly at the very least. Well darn. I guess I have some more work to do on Monolith then. 26 watts, mid-20s, when it's not doing anything exciting. And I thought getting Monolith down to 40 watts was exciting. Oh man. Well, however, this thing does have a graphics card that doesn't draw anywhere near as much power, so that's part of that. This also has a single 3.5 drive, versus a 3.5 drive and two 2.5s, which still add up to the better part of 10 watts by themselves. So, you figure this is like mid-20s or so, would get up to mid-30s. I think we're splitting hairs at this point. And if we put a 1060 in this thing instead of a 1050, it would probably be the same wattage as Monolith. So I consider this gap closed between these two systems. Whatever, man. All well and good, folks. All well and good. It's amazing, you know? 5-plus-year-old computer, and it still is pretty good for stuff like this nowadays, both in terms of power and efficiency. With a bigger power supply, could go 1060 in this thing with no trouble. Just a nice little introduction to green computing, still being computing, of course. And this is definitely the most power-efficient system I have. This Dell-asaurus I picked up with Circa 2011 is the most power-efficient system that I have, but Monolith is a close second. It's only put over 40 watts on average when not doing anything exciting because of the extra drives. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.